Today's episode is about Richard Mille, a topic that I really haven't discussed at length on this channel. We're going to talk about what I think is admirable about the brand, the significant impact that it's had on the watch industry, what the Richard Mille vision understood about humanity and culture today, and then what I hate, right? Because it is a lot, there's plenty that I absolutely loathe about the brand that I think maybe unfairly blinds me sometimes from what is truly beautiful. So today I'm wearing a vintage Cartier Santos Carré. This is my two-tone model. I also have this in solid gold, but the two-tone model doesn't get enough wrist time in my collection. I love this watch. It is so versatile. It is as, very apropos today's conversation. This is just about as sporty as watches get in my collection. Integrated bracelet, hard edges, as opposed to those little old Calatravas and tanks, etc. But I really, really do adore it. What do I think is incredible about Richard Mille? The answer there, I think, it becomes apparent when you look at context. Richard Mille released their first watch in 2001. Okay, zooming back to 2001, it really becomes obvious how forward-thinking, how divergent, how original the Richard Mille brand and brand idea and product was. Whether you like the watch or not, right? Think about what was happening in 2001. Lange was essentially a new brand. This is only 2 years after Lange released their Datograph, which is, historically speaking, considered one of the most significant accomplishments of any brand in modern history. Right? Lange & Zone, a new brand, for all intents and purposes, released a completely in-house chronograph when Patek Philippe was, over a decade away from the same achievement. Think about where Rolex was as a brand. Yes, today they're larger and sportier and more luxurious, sure. But back in 2001, Rolex watches were more stripped, let's call them. Think about complications and their democratization. This wouldn't happen for years. Now, of course, all of the brands seemingly manufacture really complicated watches, and they do it in steel, and they offer it at a price point. And back in 01, we were much less spoiled in that sense. And yet, Richard Mille released their first batch of 17 watches, and in my view, there was no writing on the wall to suggest that this was going to be a good idea, that this would be well received. There had been no precedent that designs like this worked, because there weren't designs like this. Now, whether or not the Richard Mille design language is your taste is almost irrelevant to me. Oftentimes, it's not my taste either. There are some Richard Milles that I think are beautiful. I think that Rafa Nadal has worn some absolutely gorgeous Richard Milles. I think that Richard Mille's expansion into the women's collection has been really, really beautiful, tasteful, balanced. What they do stand for in innovation and technology and sport, in a new, fresh, technological approach to the sports watch, I think is amazing, because so many of the other brands that we love, and we do love them, God knows, they are, despite our admiration and love, a little bit resting on their laurels. Even the most, divergent new JLC or Rolex is still somewhat predictable, right? They're not completely new inventions. They're not starting from scratch. This did, and I really, really applaud that. On to why I hate the brand, right? Why I think the brand is, it puts a bad taste in my mouth, and then we'll move on into the significance and their impact, on the watch industry. Why I hate the brand. The culture surrounding the brand, right? Richard Mille is, the perfect example of the COVID disaster in the watch industry. Richard Mille values absolutely skyrocketed. Things that were $150,000 went to $350,000, $400,000, and then all that appreciation dissipated, and people lost a ton of money. People were being sold on the idea of watches as an investment, and certain classes of watches are, but in this case, this was, I think, just a robbery, kind of, taking advantage of, people's desire to be kind of, it's kind of a pompous culture, people's, high test, machismo, baller kind of culture. This is, Richard Mille, I don't think was really, is best known for being owned by watch enthusiasts as much as you would find them, in a Reverso or something else, right? Very similar to like a yellow gold sky dweller. If you take a room of people that own a yellow gold sky dweller and take a room of people that own a, white gold Cellini, even the modern ones, the white gold Cellini guys probably are more into watches than the yellow gold sky dweller guys. It's just a fact. It doesn't make one less or more, but if you are someone that's passionate about watchmaking, you're generally going to gravitate toward models and collections and brands that feel like a community you want to be a part of, right? And I think that a lot of us can agree that the Richard Mille community, on its worst day, but on an average day, can be a little bit too, maybe, a little bit too competitive, a little bit too high testosterone, a little bit too obnoxious, a little bit too braggadocious for a lot of our tastes, right? I think that that's probably a fair statement. And I think that, frankly, a lot of Richard Mille owners would probably agree with that as well, right? It's very similar to like the John Mayer Daytona, right? A watch that, no one really wanted, and anyone that had one, or most people that had them, were sending a very particular message that I'm a hype beast, right? It's a tough thing to be in. So that's what puts a bad taste in my mouth, and I think in the mouths of many, right? It's just kind of the culture around. Now, that's not without exception, of course. I'm sure there are a million people that own, well, not a million, but I'm sure there are plenty of people that own Richard Milles that are lovely, and they love watches. John Goldberger owns a Richard Mille. He owns one, right? I mean, great watch collectors do own Richard Milles. There's no question about it. I would certainly own one. A buddy of mine recently said the same thing. A buddy with a totally different collection, than Richard Mille said, I'd get one. I'd get one really good one and I'd move on with my day, right? And I think that's fair, right? Because again, they really do represent divergent thinking, and I think it's an important brand of the history of watchmaking. Brings us into our third section of today's conversation, which is about their impact on watchmaking. The same way that Gerald Genta changed the watch world in the 1970s, introduced the idea of the luxury stainless steel sports watch, right? The same way that he started a whole craze, right? Which has come until today, right? We're still living in this post-Genta world where luxury can be stainless steel and integrated. That did not exist before Gerald Genta. That did not exist in 1971. It was a totally new idea that he pioneered and that the companies that paid him fought to make succeed. Right? I think Richard Mille did the same thing. Okay, I think Richard Mille did, and it wasn't derivative of Genta, which is really what the criticism of most of the other successful brands today, right? So many of their successful sports models are totally derivative. Totally. They're not original. Richard Mille, for better or worse, whether it's to your taste or not, is original. Okay? And look at its impact throughout. Not only are there just hordes of, cheap garbage, copycat, right, pieces of crap, and there are. But even the world's largest and most significant manufacturers, were impacted. Zenith is a great example. Now, I don't think that the Zenith Defy chronograph skeleton is the most obvious child of the Richard Mille era, but I certainly do think that there's an influence there. In size, in perceived complication, in sportiness, in durability. This watch is not just a logical evolution of the original El Primero. No, this is the El Primero, right, had a love child with what is essentially Richard Mille, and it was executed well. I know not everyone is a fan of Hublot. It's become, cool to dislike them. But I actually quite like the parts of their collection that were influenced by that movement of experimentation with materials and complication and size, right? Even though I am a Calatrava guy, I'm a Cartier tank guy. There's no secret. I'm a 31 to 36 millimeter watch guy, sure. But I can still appreciate a really interesting Hublot, and not only appreciate it, but recognize its roots. And of course, the big brands are not the only ones that are, creating watches that are heavily influenced by the world that Richard Mille has created, right? His perspective on the future of luxury and sport, right? They're not the only ones. There are smaller brands as well. Aventi is a great example. My thoughts here on this brand are absolutely genuine. I saw my first Aventi at a watch meetup just a few months ago, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, and it was a sapphire watch. And those of you who are frequent on this channel know that while I don't own a sapphire watch, I have long admired the experimental use of materials, particularly sapphire. I'm not a big a carbon fan, but I'm a big sapphire fan. I just find it so interesting. I think that it challenges our preconceived notions about materials and watches. I think the experience holding it is unique. It's a dynamic material. I adore the material, but that's not the material we're talking about today. Today is a new material because there's a new watch that has been released by Aventi. It features a totally new material, which is proprietary to them. They invented it. It's called Opal PMT, Opal Polymer Technology. This new material, this innovative material, has this kind of galactic feeling, right? Very similar to A. Lange & Söhne's approach with the Aventurine material on their Saxonia. Again, I think it's a good way to put it. I think that kind of, galactic color changing, these purples, these greens, these, kind of stars, right, that we see. The material opal that it's modeled after has been admired, and for good reason, for years. I mean, it's actually a big part of the movie Uncut Gems, right? This, this enchanting effect of the opal stone. And again, this is completely invented, made in-house by Aventi. And it's no secret that the market, right, the watch community has a big big appetite for innovative cases, right? Think about how far that whole class has come, even in the last 10 years. Now every micro brand is trying to innovate. And listen, innovation doesn't always equal, a fantastic product, right? 1,000 mediocre things, even bad things need to be made before something truly brilliant comes. I even loved the Sapphire of the previous iterations, but this does push the boundary further, right? Sapphire exists, so Aventi had set their sights on something new, and how could you not appreciate that, whether or not you're a fan of brilliant, right, color, the allure of the natural opal? And frankly, I think that all that innovation and kind of divergent thinking about what a case can look like is enough, but this company, goes even a step further with the movement, right, in that same, vein of RM, right? Complete complication. This watch is a torp, right? It's a tourbillon that Aventi has reimagined and actually simplified. A traditional tourbillon cage has, more than 40 individual components, and theirs is only 18, because they're reimagining, what is possible. How can you simplify something that is still very complicated in its theory, right? How can we essentially battle the impact of gravity in the most efficient way possible is kind of the question, right? Now, of course, it's not the same question that the likes of Breguet might want to answer. Breguet stands in total opposition to that, right? They want to make everything as complicated and as difficult, right, to service or to touch as possible, right? That's their game, But that's I don't know if that's the future. I don't think that's been the future of any, consumer goods that we've been buying. I think that we're moving ever more toward a place that does the difficult thing more simply, and still, as always, with a very high regard for accuracy. That's not a question. These movements are accurate plus or minus to 4 seconds a day, which is more accurate than a chronometer. And then that time is told with sapphire hands, right? Which is no slouch either. I mean, I guess the whole idea is a thought experiment in how far can we go, right? How innovative can we be? Can we, what does it look like if we leave no stone unturned, right? With a particular design, right, ethos behind us, of course. And it's clear this watch exists in the world that Richard Mille has created. In fact, one of the minds behind the engineering at Aventi is a veteran of Richard Mille and Audemars Piguet. Because these watches in every aspect, right, from case to movement, the tourbillon, everything, and because these watches are so complicated and difficult to manufacture, production is limited, but by necessity. So these watches are on an allocation basis, as with all Aventi watches. But still, I hate that word allocation because it kind of, it makes us feel like there's just this elitist kind of air about it. But I think this is the exact opposite. I think that this brand represents the democratization of innovation in that post-Richard Mille world. I think that's the best way to put it, right? A brand like this can only exist in the world that Richard Mille has created, right? In this segment that the brand forged back in 2001 and has had such success with till today. So I'm not telling you to be a Richard Mille fan. I'm not telling you that you have to like or buy the Aventi. None of that matters to me. What matters is that we, as watch collectors, as watch lovers, and again, use me as an example. I'm a little old Cartier tank guy, right? But we, as collectors, ought to appreciate, right, different schools of design, different, perspectives in this industry. And I don't think that we should allow some of the, weird kind of really specifically COVID culture of Richard Mille to blind us, right, from really what is one of the most, I think, innovative and interesting movements in the history, in the modern history, certainly, of watchmaking. I think if we boil down the history of this hobby, the history of this art form, it wouldn't be divided by all that many thinkers. Now, that's not to say that there haven't been thousands and thousands and thousands of people that have contributed to this great hobby and that all of these people should be dismissed. I don't mean that. But how many times has an individual or a company truly created an entirely new genre? So I think while I don't own a Richard Mille, and I don't think I will anytime soon, I am grateful for the company and I am interested in their product. And I don't like all of their product, God, but the ones that I do like, I think are brilliant, right? And if it weren't for them, then there would have been nothing to democratize. Right? A company like Aventi wouldn't be here making that ethos approachable, still complicated, still interesting, still innovative with material and movement, sure, but approachably, right? If the moonshot never happened, right, we all wouldn't be able to enjoy them more approachably, right? So none of us would be able to enjoy them because, it's a $180,000 watch. Who's, come on, hey, let's get real, So anyway, I think this is a great episode. I think it pushed me out of my comfort zone when it comes to genre of watch. And thank you, obviously, to Richard Mille for the brilliance. That's it. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you all soon.